I'm excited to be here with you, and I want this evening to talk about the nature of truth, what it is and how we know it. But before I do that, I want to pray. Father, I turn to you as the God of all truth, the God who created the universe and the real world that we talk about whenever we make a truth claim. And I recognize truly, Lord, that I don't know very much. I recognize my limits. I recognize, Father, to some degree I'm a pea brain. But I know that one time your son took something very limited, 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he blessed them and he broke them and he distributed them, and everybody left satisfied. Could your Holy Spirit please do something like that this evening? Could he take the crumbs that are offered, and could he bless them and multiply them so that everybody here would say, I heard something that really spoke to me. And in that hearing, with the recognition that this whole room is full of complexity, nobody's heart is exactly the same. How can one person stand in a room full of people where everybody's got different challenges in their life, different hopes, different fears? How could one person speak so that every heart would hear something unique to his or her need? And I believe it can happen, Father, if your son, in his Holy Spirit, takes the words that are spoken and distributes them in such a way that each person would have in that the affirmation how much you love him or her by virtue of the fact that you gave them what they needed. Please accomplish that in our midst this evening. I pray for Christ's sake. Amen. I was a pastor for 23 years. During those 23 years, I taught college courses for 16. Philosophy, C.S. Lewis, and spiritual formation. Then I left pastoring, and I was a professor for 25 years. And I taught full-time, and I finally became a full professor. To become a full professor, that doesn't mean you had a satisfying meal. It means you write lots of books, you write articles, you read papers at academic gatherings, and so on. And it's a lot of work. It's like climbing Mount Everest at some level. But in all those years of teaching, and even the years I was pastoring, 19 of those years was with student ministry, mostly college. I became a Christian in college, so I pretty much spent my life invested with students. And I've often asked the question, what is truth? I mean, Jesus spoke about truth, and Pilate said to him, what is truth? It's never answered in that context, you know. And I would say that probably in every 100 students I ask, there'll be one who I think can give me a satisfactory answer. And yet we use the term all the time. We call people out, this is true, or that's not true, or that's a lie. We hear it all the time, even in the media, especially this last political cycle. We heard it constantly. So the question is, what is truth? Any of you want to venture a guess?
Jesus Christ.
Well, I'm going to get back to that. Because I think when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, how does he mean that? Yes?
The words of God are
Say it again.
The words of God are truth.
The word of God is true. Why? Why is it true?
Because he's God.
Huh?
Because he's God. He made it, so it follows what he says.
Those are approximations, both of those. But they're not really what truth is. Yes?
Something absolute.
Something absolute? So could we know truth then? Do you know anything absolutely?
Yahweh is Christ.
You know that absolutely. You know what that means in every situation and context.
Maybe not the fullest extent.
Huh?
I absolutely know it.
Beg your pardon?
I don't know in every context, but I know absolutely.
Say it again a little louder. I got hearing aids.
I don't know in every context, but I know it absolutely.
But how do you know it's absolutely true then? If we say truth is that which is absolute, and we don't know truth, I find that frustrating because it means I'll never know truth. We throw the word around absolute truth a lot. I think we can use that phrase, But we have to be cautious of how we're using it so we're using it well. The secular world, when I'm out talking to people and they hear Christians say absolute truth, they say, you guys are the height of arrogance. You think you can understand things absolutely? And they think we're nuts for good reason. And then if they challenge us on it, we often can't give the answer. How we use that. What does that word mean? I'll come back to it in a moment, but let's try some others. What is truth? Have you ever made a claim, a truth claim? This is the truth. Or I believe this. Or this is true. You wrote a paper in school and you said, this is true. What did you mean by that? And how did you use the word? This becomes extremely important to us because we're making judgments all the time, and sometimes we don't know how to validate the judgment. And we lose credit when we do that. I can give you a really good example. It's an embarrassing one, however. My wife took a course on Picasso, the artist. And I said to her, oh, Picasso was an idiot. She said, really? What do you know about Picasso? I didn't know anything. She said, well, the first thing we have to do is figure out who the idiot is here and then try to see if that idiot is educable. I didn't know anything about Picasso. She took me to the Chicago Art Institute. They had a Picasso exhibit. She took me through. She had taken a course on him, and she's explaining what he was doing with his art. And I go, oh, my word. I misjudged things so badly. Another time we were in Barcelona, Spain, and we went to the Picasso Museum. And I said, this guy is a great artist. Another time we were in Madrid, and we went to the Prado, and we saw his famous painting, Guernica. And I'm saying, this is breathtaking. I was making judgments I didn't have the authority to make because I didn't know what validated a truth claim or a false claim. Lewis said all judgments imply a standard. All judgments imply a standard. What's the standard for a truth judgment or the truth or falsehood of any matter? If we have time, I'll look at C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man. We may not have time for it, but it's his most thorough investigation of objective statements relative to truth. It's probably one of his 3 best books out of the 73 he wrote. And Mortimer Adler, the philosopher, included it in the Great Books of the Western World in 1968, putting it up there with works by Plato and Aristotle, works by Calvin and Luther, works by Augustine and Thomas Aquinas. And in that book, well, I don't have time to give you the argument now. If we have time afterwards, I will, but I just want to make sure I'm using the time wisely. He makes a statement that he coins a term, the Tao. You say Tao if you want, but Tao is how I pronounce it. And he uses an Eastern term to define the concept of truth. And the reason why he wants to do this is because he wants to show that the idea of truth is not a Western idea. It's a universal idea. And it needs to be understood objectively. In any truth claim, you have a subject, the speaker or the knower, and you have an object, the thing that's being spoken about. And here's what he writes. The doctrine, the Tao, is the doctrine of objective value, the belief that certain attitudes are really true and others really false to the kind of thing the universe is and the kind of things we are. Here's a truth claim, here's an object. Does the object support the truth claim? Truth is not reality. Truth is what I think about reality when I think accurately about it. You have to have an object. This is a pen. True or false? True. Now you could say, well, how do you define a pen and all that stuff? I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But nevertheless, from what we understand, this is a pen. The statement is true because there's a pen there that validates the statement. This is an elephant. True or false? False. Why is it false? Elephants exist, but this is not one. A truth claim has to be supported by the object that it asserts. And sometimes I can't get to the object. Sometimes I have to settle for an opinion. An opinion is something that is probable, not, it's probable, but it's not proven. It's not definite. It's probable, and therefore it's subject to doubt, opinions, and therefore reasonable people could differ on matters of opinion. And to know the difference between truth and opinion is also important. I can give you some examples. My office at Wheaton College was in the Billy Graham Center, and I was up on the 3rd floor. I had to go to the restroom. And I'm in the stall making a full deposit, you see. And I heard somebody come into the restroom. And I finished up my duty, and I came out of the little stall, and there's a woman standing at the mirror fixing her makeup. She sees me come out of the stall, and she starts berating me for being in the women's bathroom. So clearly we have a conflict of conceptual framework here. And I won the argument with one word when I pointed and said, urinals. And she screamed and ran out of the room. What corrected her misnomer was that there wasn't a reality that supported her claim. What corrected mine was that. C.S. Lewis was once giving a debate at the Oxford Socratic Club in Oxford, and there was a relativist who stood up and yelled at him, "How do you know there's not a blue cow sitting on that piano right now?" And Lewis looked at him and said, "In what sense blue?" The statement's a meaningless statement if there's nothing to refer to. He was a relativist who said you could say anything you want to be true and whatnot. It's false. That's a false statement. So what about the Jesus statement? I am the way, the truth, and the life. What is he saying when he says that? Is he saying, I am reality? I think he could have said that. I'm the substantive basis for all reality. It says in Colossians, in him all things were created, and in him all things hold together. I think you could say something along that line. I don't think that's what he's saying when he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. Philip responds. Thomas first responds, we don't know the way, and then he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And then Philip responds and says, Lord, show us the Father, it's enough for us. And he says, Philip, have I been with you so long that you have not seen the Father? For all the Father has said, that I have said. And all the Father has told me to do, that I have done. Matter of fact, 18 times in John's Gospel, he's making that claim. He is the true statement about what God's life is like if we were to see it funneled into human experience. So he's saying, I am the true statement of what God is like. Why do I say it in that context? Because in John's Gospel, how does it begin? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things came into being through him, and nothing has come into being that has come into being. You've got this also in Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers in the prophets in many portions and in many ways, God who is speaking to people through the prophets, true words, because they reflected true reality, not only his character and nature, but his expectation for us that he had clearly given us in Scripture. But in these last days, it says, he has spoken to us in his Son. If you want to know what God is like, you want to know what God is truly like, you look at his Son, Jesus Christ, the Word incarnate. And I don't think we can even understand ourselves if we don't see ourselves situated in certain contexts. You know who you are in relationship to other people. You know who you are in relationship to what God wants you to be and do. Dante, who wrote the Divine Comedy, he wrote a couple of other books too, the Vita Nuova, the Convivo, and he wrote the De Monarchia. In the De Monarchia of the monarch, he said, function precedes essence. Function, the purpose God has for you, preceded what he gave you when he made you the person you are. You go to the creation account in Genesis 1. He makes light on the first day, the function of light. But he doesn't make the luminaries, the sun, moon, and stars, till day 4. And if you go around really in life and try to gain your sense of self based on how you perceive other people see you, you're probably going to get all kinds of false notions of who you are. You want to understand who you are in relationship to how God sees you, and he loves you. And God has assigned for you a unique purpose. And J.B. Phillips, in his translation of Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, says, do not let the world squeeze you into its mold. They may be giving you assignments that you were not designed to fulfill. So we look to God. We can look to others for affirmation to some degree or another. You know, if we do well, if we're trying to serve them and they were served, if they were not served well and we were trying to serve them, then we did not serve them probably truly, unless we were confronting them because they were living in sin. And we told them they shouldn't live like that, and you're appealing to a truth you got in Scripture compared to the reality of their life. So we use words when we communicate things, and words are symbols. So the word symbol comes from two Greek words, soon, with, and balein, to cast. Balo is the word for to throw or to cast. So the word ball is a casting thing, right? So we cast two things together. A word initially is arbitrary, but I throw two things together. I throw the word pen with this object. I could have called it a Gesortenblatt. It's arbitrary at first. But if I want language to be meaningful, it can't be arbitrary after time. Its use has to become common. So now when I've thrown the word pen together with one of these things, I don't have to have one present to refer to when I talk about a pen. Language becomes possible. Communication becomes possible. Community becomes possible. Cultures become possible. But what do I do if I no longer respect words and what they mean and what the objective reality is that support them? Oh, you can be any pronoun you want. You can be any gender you want. Doesn't have to have a reality to support the claim. And what happens? Culture breaks down. Communication breaks down. Words lose their meaning, and we come back again into the Tower of Babel. And we end up like that. Lewis writes about this in The Abolition of Man, but he also writes a work of fiction. He often would write a work in proposition and then a work in fiction to depict what he was saying here. The work of depiction of The Abolition of Man is That Hideous Strength. Have any of you ever read that book? It's a culture that starts to deny the meaning of words, and it unravels into chaos. And I think we're on the threshold of that now. Why are we on the threshold? Because we don't know what truth is. We don't know how words work. And we use words incautiously ourselves as Christians. We should be the most careful about this because we want people to understand what we say about Christ and what we mean when we say it. So consequently, there's I want to say one thing about this too. Lewis said, in relationship to truth, it was a lecture he gave at Oxford University to the English students. He said, we've fulfilled our whole duty to you if we can help you see some given tract of reality. Now remember, truth is not reality. Truth is what I think about reality when I think accurately about it. If we can help you see some reality, if we can help you see a work of literature and you read what's there rather than project onto it what you want to be there. You read what's there, you get out of it what it says. He writes in one of his literary critical works called An Experiment in Criticism, in coming to understand anything, we must reject the facts as they are for us in favor of the facts as they are. And if we forget this, then we think that the railroad track actually does narrow as it moves further away from us. That's to lose perspective on things. So consequently, in this essay or this lecture that he gave to the students, we fulfilled our whole duty to you if we can help you see some given tract of reality. He's trying to begin by helping his students see what truth is and how they can then develop their understanding of that truth. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And I think then this idea of reality, if we look at it well, we're going to see that it's infused with the presence of God and the purposes of God. It was Elizabeth Barrett Browning, the poet, who said, every bush is a burning bush and the world is crowded with God. And Lewis put it in another way too. I really like this. He said, making a statement, it's from chapter 17 of Letters to Malcolm, chiefly on prayer, the last book he wrote before he died. And in this book, he's making a comparison between gratitude and adoration or worship. Gratitude exclaims very properly, how good of God to give me this. But adoration asks, what must that being be like whose far off and momentary coruscations are like this? One's mind runs back up the sunbeam to the sun. A coruscation is a sudden flash of brightness. If you saw fireflies, have you ever seen fireflies? Yeah, they're in Wheaton. I never saw them when I lived in California, except at Pirates of the Caribbean at Disneyland. They have those electronic ones. But I moved to Wheaton and I was in awe. I'm still in awe of fireflies. But we could talk about fireflies coruscating in the back garden. We could talk about looking westward as storm clouds are coming our way and seeing in those clouds lightning coruscating in the clouds. You got the idea? Gratitude exclaims very properly, how good of God to give me this. But adoration asks, what must that being be like whose far off and momentary coruscations are like this? And the reality of God's display in the universe, if I shut him out, then I'm missing out on all kinds of things he's trying to exhibit to me in this world. There's a place in Surprised by Joy by C.S. Lewis where he said he never saw, absence of beauty characterized his childhood. I never saw a beautiful building. I never believed a building could be beautiful. I've been all through his boyhood home twice. It's one of the most beautiful homes I've ever seen in my life. When I walked into the house, I immediately remembered what he had written in Surprised by Joy, and I say, this is totally incongruous. The statement is utterly false. I never saw a beautiful building. That building was beautiful. He said the first beauty he ever saw was when his brother Warren brought into the nursery a toy garden that he had made on a biscuit tin. And he says then at this moment, what all real gardens failed to do for me, that garden did. What did that tell me? There was somehow a moment when all of a sudden Lewis, with all this beauty around him, had it break through to him, and that was in a sense the moment where God was breaking through and awakening in him longing that would haunt him for the rest of his days till he came to Christ and drive him hungry to find the object of his longing, the object of his longing, the true object of his longing. This is very interesting to me. How many of you have walked through art museums and you've seen paintings on walls and stuff like that? And you walk by them. And then all of a sudden there's one. You go, oh my heavens. Have any of you had that experience? Tell me about it. What was the painting?
It was the Mona Lisa.
Mona Lisa. You saw it at the Louvre.
In Paris. That's right.
You got close enough to it because the crowd was all around it.
The crowd was surrounded.
Yeah. So the Mona Lisa. Okay, that's good. There's a lot of people who've had similar experience to you there. What else? Who's got one? Yeah, what do you got?
There was an art museum back in Seattle.
Say it again.
There was an art museum back in Seattle.
Yeah.
It was just this picture, like a boat on the water. It was just super, super cool.
It's a picture of
A boat on the water.
a boat on the water. And you just looked at it. And did you look at it quick and say, well, that's interesting, and walk on? You lingered long, didn't you? Anybody else got one? Yes, what do you got? Wait a minute, Faith.
This one was not a painting, but we were just down in Virginia to visit my grandpa, and he does a lot of photography. So there's this one picture of a bird, and it's like a blue bird. I don't remember what kind of bird it was, but it's on the wall, and I was just like,
Did he catch it standing or in flight?
just standing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was like standing on a log.
But you were so attracted to it.
Yeah.
And you've probably seen thousands of pictures of birds, but that one broke through. Something transcendent broke through to you at that moment.
Yeah.
I was with Mark Lewis, who's probably my best friend on the faculty at Wheaton College. There's a group of us that meet together regularly. We do retreats together. We're very tight. And Mark is a theater professor. He used to be an actor on Broadway in New York. He was in the soap operas also, and so on. And then he left and came to teach at Wheaton. And he had a place in New York City. And my wife and I were there with Mark and Mary, his wife. And we went to the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art. I'd never been there before. And we're going through the art museum, and all of a sudden I come to Van Gogh's Cypresses in a Wheat Field. And I look at this painting and I go, oh my heavens, it's about this wide and probably like this on the wall. And you can see the amber waves of grain. You've got all those contrasting colors like you get used to with a Van Gogh painting. You can see the top of the cypress tipping over a little bit, but the waves, it's moving, and the sky is turbulent. And you can almost feel the wind blowing off the canvas while you're standing there. And I go, oh my heavens. And I stood there right in front of it for about 15 or 20 minutes before I realized other people are trying to get in there to see it, and I'm hogging the whole thing. So I back up, and I backed into a bench. I don't know who put it there. It was bolted to the floor. And I sat down and was grateful and looked at it for another 15 minutes. And then I thought to myself, wait a minute, I'm with Mark and Mary and Claudia. Where are they? And you know how art museums have those wide doors between rooms and so on? And I'm looking down this way. I don't see them. I'm looking down this way. I don't see them. You know what else I didn't see? A bench. Enough people must have had that objective experience with that particular painting that they put a bench there. And I've been back to see it about 10 times. And every time I go back now, what I see is there's benches everywhere. But at that time, there was only one bench. I did a lot of teaching behind the Iron Curtain in days of yore when the people back there who were Christians couldn't get Christian education. And we'd go in and teach. And one time I got hassled by the secret police in Romania for about 6 hours. That was no fun. I got to say, well, I can leave. These people have to sit and endure this all the time. And I just was intensely interested in the beauty of the character of the Christians who suffered for their faith. But while I was there, I'd been behind the Iron Curtain for a month. My family wasn't with me. I was so homesick. And I had one free day after being there for a month, and it was in Prague. And I went wandering around Prague by myself. I wandered up the hill to St. Vitus Cathedral. And I walked in that cathedral, most beautiful stained glass windows I had ever seen. And I get to the third window on the left. The painting by Alphonse Mucha, the founder of Art Nouveau. And here's a painting with Christianity coming to the Slavic people. Cyril and Methodius, the monks, bringing it and leading Ludmila and Boživoj, the king and queen of the Slavs, to Christ. And their grandson, Wenceslas, became the first Slavic Christian king and also the first martyr, Christian martyr. The whole story is depicted on that window. The colors are so vibrant. I've never seen stained glass that vibrant before. And on the top of it is Jesus like this, like it's all happening under his control. And I just sat there for an hour looking at this window. I've been back to see it about 12 times. What is it about that? There's lots of windows. There's lots of paintings. There's lots of toy gardens on biscuit tins. But God so individualizes his interest in us that he reaches out and grabs us. But this stuff is all around. And by the way, if you start to be attentive to it more and more, you begin to see it more and more frequently, where God is exhibiting his glory in so many places. So here's Lewis. Again, gratitude exclaims very properly, how good of God to give me this. But adoration asks, what must that being be like whose far off and momentary coruscations are like this? One's mind runs back up the sunbeam to the sun. If we see reality well, our hearts are lifted in worship. And I remember when I read that quote by Lewis in Letters to Malcolm. It was about 1979, first time I read it. Voyager, the interplanetary probe, which is now interstellar probe, right? If you've been following the information. It was speeding past Saturn, the most mysterious planet in our solar system, the one with rings. And they took pictures. Voyager took pictures of Saturn up close and personal and sent them down to JPL in Pasadena. And I still have my Time magazine with those pictures. I still have my National Geographic with those pictures. You know what they discovered? The outer ring of Saturn, it's called the F ring. It's braided. It's braided. And I started asking Lewis's question from Letters to Malcolm, the adoration question. What must God be like that he chose to braid the outer ring of Saturn though no human being had ever seen it before? I shared this with a friend of mine and he said, yeah, and we don't know, Jerry, if God didn't just braid it for the picture, like you would a little girl's hair, you know? And then I start thinking about this stuff. What must God be like? You know, what must he be like that he paints fish in the bowels of the Pacific Ocean greater than the light of sun could reach, but when they dangle cameras down into those depths, they take pictures of fish painted neon bright. Why? Can't be to attract a mate. Matter of fact, how do fish at those depths get together? That itself is an interesting question. What must God be like? I grew up in Southern California. I always liked to see palm trees silhouetted against an auburn sunset sky, or a mountain range silhouetted against an auburn sunset sky. Now I live in the Midwest. A cornfield silhouetted against an auburn sunset sky. There's beauty there if you'd willingly distill it out. But we could have lived on a darkened planet and gotten word on high there would be one sunset. And we could have lined every west coast of every continent and every island on our globe and regaled our progeny with the glory of that event in our journals and diaries. But what must God be like that he has made our planet a perpetual kaleidoscope of sunrises and sunsets? And we see it all the time, and we hardly even pay attention to it. Don't be shamed by that fact. Grow by that fact. Say, oh Lord, help my voice be lifted up in joy to the reality you've set before me, because when I worship you, that is an act of truth. I'm responding to objective reality well. What must God be like that he made stars? One star twinkling in a night sky should be enough to awaken wonder and awe in the heart and mind of every right-thinking, right-feeling individual. But what must God be like that he has glittered the night sky with suns and moons and shooting stars? And I wish you could have been with me at Wheaton College's Northwoods campus up by Lake Superior when I was teaching one summer, and the students came and they're knocking on the door. Jerry, they're out, they're out. And we went out and saw the northern lights. Blues, greens, reds, and whites, coruscating and pulsating in the night sky. And you know what we did? From midnight to 2:30 in the morning, we stood on the ski dock and did that which was just, because justice is to render to a thing its due. We stood on the ski dock and we sang hymns of praise to God with wonder and awe. What must God be like that he's made delicate things like hummingbirds, flower petals, butterflies, or peacock feathers? There's one you could get off on for a while. But Lewis is too honest to stop there. He forces us to ask other questions too. What must God be like that there's AIDS babies born in Africa? Tsunamis in Japan? That there are earthquakes in Haiti? That there are people starving throughout the world? That there are aggressive acts in Ukraine and so on? Lewis says in his sermon, famous sermon, The Weight of Glory, if our religion is objective, remember truth is a statement about an objective reality. If our religion is objective, then we must never avert our eyes from those elements in it which seem puzzling or repellent. For it's precisely in the puzzling or repellent where we discover what we do not yet know and need to know desperately. This becomes all important, I think. A true statement is a statement that has an objective reality that supports the claim. And if we overstate, we engage in some problems. And we lose credit as Christians. Just like I lost credit when I said to my wife, Picasso was an idiot. Catch yourself whenever you do it. We all do it at times. Catch yourself and say, what can I really say here? What is true? What is accurate? And so on. Augustine wrote an essay on lying, St. Augustine. And he said, to speak a falsehood is not to lie. It has to be a knowing deception for it to be a lie. You never got a test paper back from your teacher, and in the margin next to every wrong answer, the teacher wrote, you liar, you liar, you liar. It was false, but it wasn't a lie. You didn't seek to knowingly deceive, I hope. So the question is then, what is it that keeps us from seeing truth? And I think there could be a lot of reasons why we don't see it. Immaturity minimizes sight. Lewis said you can't teach a 6-year-old about sex. They're developmentally handicapped. If you say to the 6-year-old, well, sex is something extremely pleasurable that God has reserved for a married couple, the child will hear it pleasurable, and the child with his 6-year-old mind says, wow, they must eat chocolates while they do it, because they don't have any other category for pleasure more than candy or something like that. What else keeps us? Not just immaturity, limited experience. When I was a student at Talbot Seminary, you could come out of the Myers Hall and you could look up in the mountains and you could see Mount Baldy. And whenever the first snow would come, you'd see Mount Baldy, is my favorite mountain in America, right? Mount Baldy. You could see, the Bible says God has the hairs of our head numbered, which means he knows less and less about some of us every day. But anyway, Mount Baldy, you could see it when it was snow covered, and it's glorious. And there was a couple that were at the seminary, Anthony and Diane Ong. They were from Singapore. They had heard about snow. They had read about snow. They had an intellectual understanding of snow. They had never seen snow. And so I said to them, Diane and Anthony, look, Mount Baldy, it's covered with snow. And they looked at it and they could not see it. And they thought it was like a white cloud on the mountain or something like that. So I drew a picture of a mountain. And I drew where the snow cap was and where the snow, when it went from mountain to snow. And I showed them that. And all of a sudden they got it. And they just started jumping up and down. And I went home and told my wife, Claudia, about it. And she says, we got to take them up there. So this was like on a Thursday. So we made arrangements to take them up on Saturday. But we didn't tell them about the qualities of snow. We threw in the trunk of the car an extra coat for each of them and gloves for each of them. Claudia and I were wearing our coats, and when we got out, they got out of the car, we started packing snowballs and throwing them at them. And then they tried to pack them too, but their hands were freezing. We said, we got something for you, and we got out the gloves and the coat. They had the experience of snow, but until they had the experience, they really couldn't see. There's also moral compromise that keep us from seeing things. This is a tough one. C.S. Lewis said, continued disobedience to conscience makes conscience blind. If I am compromised morally, I lose the capacity to see the validity of the true statement. Paul said in Romans, we suppress the truth in our unrighteousness. Jesus said there are people who have eyes but cannot see and ears that cannot hear. How did he break through to them? He told them stories. Told them parables. They'd already put up their defenses. He tried to break through with the defenses. How about Nathan? He's told, you got to go tell David he's in deep Bandini. Bandini's a fertilizer company in Southern California. You're in deep doo-doo, buddy. And how does he go tell him that? He goes and knows that he's already killed one person to cover up his story of adultery and murder. And so Nathan goes and tells him a story. And David hears the story, and it enters tangentially into his heart. And he condemns the man who did that, and Nathan says, you're the man. You're the man. There's a reality he needs to get associated with. There's a truth that he needs to hear, and he tells him the truth in a creative way that breaks through his moral blindness. There are also cultural blinders that we have. Usually from groupthink, we hang around the same people all the time. I would see it all the time at Wheaton College. Somebody's grown up in a particular denomination, and they've heard about the people from that denomination over there, and they really are suspicious of them. And then they get to Wheaton, and they're in the dorm, and they have their point of view, and one of those guys shows up, and he's in the dorm room down the hall. And all of a sudden they start talking, and they go, well, this thing's bigger than I thought. And they end up having good fellowship, and they get to know each other. There were cultural blinders. They were in a group, and there was sort of a group think. You think that only your denomination is going to be in heaven, and these other guys, they might be there, but they'll be down on one of Dante's lower heavens if they don't end up in purgatory or hell, And this idea of cultural blinders, I had a woman in one of my C.S. Lewis classes at Wheaton College Her name was Shannon Farrow, or Farrow Shannon. So very Irish, right? And her best friend, she told me, from kindergarten was coming to visit her. And her best friend was a student at Brown University. Brown is an Ivy League school. It's a very, very good school. And her best friend was an atheist. And she was going to bring her, because her spring break was different than ours, and was going to bring her to class. Would I be willing to talk to her about Jesus afterwards? I said, I'd be delighted. She comes. They come up after class. And I say to them, you guys have been friends since kindergarten. Not many people have friendships that go back that far. Tell me about the quality of your friendship. We're talking for a few minutes. And then I said, Farrow said that you go to Brown. You must be very bright. It's a very good school, challenging school. What are you majoring in? She said, biochemistry. I say, wow, that's a challenging major. You must be very bright. Well, we've talked about spiritual things in class today. What did you think? And she said, well, as a biochemist, which I thought was a little premature. She was only a sophomore in college. But as a biochemist, I live by the principle, if I can't perceive it empirically, I just won't believe it. I said, well, let me see if I've got you right. Now, you say you live by the principle, if you can't perceive something empirically, you just won't believe it. She said, yes. I said, well, would you please set forth that principle for me empirically? I hope you see the problem. It's a proposition. It's not empirically perceived. And she had not even seen that before. And she freaks out when I asked her the question. She says, I can't believe I never saw the contradiction in my own presupposition. She said, why, everybody at Brown University believes this. Overstated, obviously. I said, no, there's Christians at Brown too. You'd be surprised. They kind of get everywhere. Plus, I wouldn't say that all materialists would go as far as you did just then when you said that. And I said, don't get me wrong. I love the sciences. John Polkinghorne, who was a Christian physicist at Cambridge University with 2 earned PhDs, 1 in physics and 1 in theology. He was a president of one of the Cambridge University colleges in England and also pastored a church at the same time. And Polkinghorne said, if you ask the scientists, why is the kettle boiling? The scientists would say, well, heat from the burner is agitating the molecules and causing it to boil at 100 degrees centigrade. He says that's the answer the scientists could give you by the measurable features of what's occurring. But he said you could also say it's boiling because I wanted a cup of tea and would you like one too? The second answer is equally valid, but it shows that not everything can be defined by mere scientific ideology. A true statement is that which reflects reality. You can say it to the degree the scientists could say it, but the statement is limited because it's more complex. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Mortimer Adler, who was a philosopher at University of Chicago, he said, we've gone in 4 generations, we've gone from saying that which is measurable is that which is important for science to saying that which is measurable is the only thing that's important. And in our materialistic culture, the high priests of the materialistic culture are often the scientists. Now, scientists say good things, and I said to this young woman, don't get me wrong, I love the sciences. And I love what they've been able to produce and how the engineers have applied it so that my life is easier lived than it might have been before the scientists did what they did. I live in cold, cold, cold Chicago. And I'm grateful I don't have an outhouse. They figured out how to do indoor plumbing, and I am just grateful every day in the winter for that indoor plumbing. I wish now they would learn how to heat the toilet seats. It would be really good. You know, we could improve on this. And so this idea I said to her of science and engineering is really important, but in the liberal arts world, that's only 1/4 of the pie. You also have the social sciences, psychology, sociology, anthropology. Societies are always fluid, and these people seek to tell us the truth of the moment. In that moment of fluidity, what's going on in the culture? We want to understand our own world and our own time. It's helpful. I love also that quarter called the fine arts. the artists, the musicians, and so on. Mortimer Adler used to call the fine arts the useless arts. Not because they had no value. They have great value, but they don't necessarily have a utilitarian value. You were made in the image of a creator. Tolkien said, you are a sub-creator. It's only right that you would do creative things. You may never sell your paintings for $1 million or your compositions or your poetry, but you need to be engaged in creative activity because God made you as a creative being, and when you do that, you are engaged in an activity that exhibits truth in the way you're made. I love the fine arts, and I love the people who really excel in it, so I can benefit by their artistic endeavor, and my soul will be lifted up. And then there are the humanities. This is literature, history, philosophy, the realm of ideas, the realm of human past, and the realm of what with literature? You can have some events that could take place in time, and they flare up like 4th of July fireworks, and they dissipate into ash a few minutes later. But you have other things that occur in time and place, and it sort of lingers in the memory, and people record it in their works of history. You have some things that people write about in books, and the next generation, they write about something similar again, and the next generation, something similar, and we even read the books of the past. Why? Because these things reflect not just the things that flare up in a moment of time, but they reflect the human issues that are perennial. And we learn about ourselves in those environments. We learn truths about ourselves, and they reflect the reality as we know it. And so I said to her, I like all of this stuff. I don't want to just give the scientists the opportunity to co-opt all this other stuff that will allow me to have a more robust understanding of the truth of the world I live in. She came back the next year to my class. I said, hey, how are you? It's great to see you. She said, I'm an agnostic now. I go, that's progress. That's progress. So what happened, though, was she had lived in a world where she didn't see because she lived in a groupthink environment where everybody she talked to, especially when she made the comment, why everybody at Brown University believes this. Now, I'll give you another example. So we had a guy who was a professor at Wheaton who in the theology department was a dispensationalist, and he retired. And the chairman of that department, the eminent theologian Walter Elwell, he was saying, he's Reformed, he said, we got to get another dispensationalist. I go, well, that's great. Why are you saying that when you're a Reformed person? He said, we're in a creedal institution. That means we hold to the Apostles' Creed, we hold to the Nicene Creed, and so on. Basic understanding of mere Christianity. And if we do that, we want to help our kids learn to think critically in a creedal institution. How do you do that? Unless you represent all the views that are under the umbrella. We're going to hire another dispensationalist. I go, that is amazing. I'm a 6-day guy when it comes to creation. And there's only a few of us at Wheaton's campus. I would teach a class on biblical foundations, and I would teach 10 different views of origins that could be construed as Christians. And I would always use somebody representing that view that the students would have heard of, who they respected their spirituality. So I wasn't trying to prejudice the case. And then at the end, I'd make my case for 6-day creation, okay? So here's Elwell saying we need to teach creedal students critical thinking. I go over to the science department, and I talk to somebody over there, and I go, how come you don't have a 6-day creationist on this faculty? And this guy said to me, are you kidding me, Jerry? We would be the laughingstock of educational institutions if we did something like that. You will never find a 6-day creationist, especially in the life sciences. I go, wow. That summer I was giving lectures at a theology conference in Poland. People came from all over Europe to this conference. And I'm talking to this guy. He's a Cambridge University professor. And I said, what do you teach? He says, biology. I said, well, where are you on the origins issue? He says, I'm a 6-day guy. What did that tell me? The guy at Wheaton was in a little enclave and wasn't talking to people outside of his enclave, or he would have found out there are people who didn't think the way he thought necessarily. Groupthink can help us from seeing reality accurately. I think we should be encouraged. We should be around people who think like we think, but we shouldn't just think that way. C.S. Lewis said, the thing that brings friends together is a common interest. Friendship is about something. Lovers, they're interested in each other. You walk behind lovers and they're going down the street like this because they're just looking at each other, not where they're going. Friends are walking lickety-split down the street talking about this idea that brought them together. And Lewis says the first friend is a friend who reads all the books you read and gets the same things out of them. That shows you're not crazy. Other people see what you've seen. The second friend is a friend who reads all the same books you read and gets something different out of them. That's your critical friend, and that's the one you have debates with so that you can extend your understanding and benefit from the insights that somebody you trust is also getting. And then he says, you also need to have a group of friends. And that was Lewis with the Inklings, Tolkien, Neville Coghill, Charles Williams, Lewis's brother Warren Lewis, Hugo Dyson. These people were brilliant Oxford academics. They didn't all see the same thing. They had a core common Christianity, mere Christianity, and then there was discussion. That's great. So anyway, you can have these kind of blinders, a cultural blinder and so on. And then you can have Christians who have blinders. We need to say that keeps them from seeing reality. One of them, I think, is that, well, this is a big idea of Lewis's, and it'll help us here. Lewis's biggest idea in all of his books, 73 books, the biggest idea is reality is iconoclastic. A true statement is a statement that's informed by or supported by reality. But reality is complex. Reality is iconoclastic. An iconoclast is a person who breaks idols. I have an idea of God, say. I heard a great sermon. I read a great book. I had a great Joshua discussion group. And all of a sudden, some of the pieces of the puzzle came together for me, and I saw God in greater proportion, and it took my breath away. But if I hold too tightly to that present image, that image will compete against my having a growing understanding. And the image, once helpful, now becomes an idol. God in his mercy breaks the idols. C.S. Lewis said, God always kicks out walls of temples we build for him because he wants to give us more of himself. And so consequently, what do? I have to hold what I know with an open hand. God wants to give me more. This is not unique to Lewis. If there's an author he liked, Baron von Hugel, who is a philosopher and a spiritual director. Baron von Hugel, in his letters to his niece, said, beware of the first clarity. Press on to the second clarity and the third clarity. Robert Browning, whose wife was the one who said, every bush is a burning bush and the world's a crowd with God. He wrote a poem called Rabbi Ben Ezra. I read it to my wife every year on our anniversary, which we're having our 50th anniversary, by the way. It's the day after I get back from here, I'm going to New Zealand with my wife for our 50th anniversary. And I said, do you feel loved? I'm taking you to New Zealand. She says, yeah, I don't know if I feel loved or if you just wanted the miles. Anyway, there you go. So Robert Browning, in this poem, Rabbi Ben Ezra, begins, grow old along with me. The best is yet to be. I gave that one year to my wife for our anniversary. She has it as a wood thing on the wall in our bedroom. But about line 32 or 33 in that poem, he says, then welcome each rebuff that turns earth's smoothness rough. I can think I have it all figured out. My earth is all nice and smooth. My understanding of the world, everything is in place. But the earth isn't smooth. It has texture. It has geography. It has peaks. It has valleys. Welcome the things that help you to see it the way that it is rather than the way you have to have it be. You've also got Tennyson in his poem In Memoriam. He's talking about theological systems. He says our little systems have their day. They have their day and cease to be. They are but broken lights of thee, And thou, O Lord, art more than they. God is bigger than our best thoughts about him. That Walter Elwell, he said, all theology is approximation. And what we seek are bigger and bigger approximations. And there's that great theologian, Lucy Pevensey. Do you remember her? If you've ever read the Chronicles of Narnia, you remember Lucy. She sees Aslan, the Christ figure, for the first time on her second trip to Narnia. And she says, Aslan, you're bigger. He says, oh, no, child, I am not. But every year you grow, you'll find me bigger. Look at the history of theology. We have this council in Acts 15. I read about it in my quiet time this morning. Where do you have to become a Jew to become a Christian? And they have this council to discuss it. And then you have the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. And they resolve some problems about the Trinitarian issue. But they didn't resolve all the problems. They have another council, Constantinople, in 381. And then they have another council, Chalcedon, in 451. And what we're learning is, here's the Bible, it's given to us. But our understanding of that Bible is not a last word. And so we're trying to grow, to go deeper, to grow wider in our understanding, because this is an opportunity for us to understand the truth, and truth is dynamic, not static. And our understanding should not be inert, it should be growing. So we have these issues of self-deception. How are we doing time-wise? I don't want to bore everybody.
You're good.
Give me a ballpark. We got Q&A too, right?
Yeah, you've got another 15 minutes.
Okay, good. So I'm going to pass these out here. All of you take them. Another reason why we miss is because it's kind of a groupthink thing. Pass those back. There's a thing called the informal fallacy in logic. Do you guys know about these? They're things that sound so good, but they are so false. And we listen to them all the time. I want you to learn these while you're here. I want you to learn them, and I want you to, anytime you see anything, you listen to a podcast, you see a newscast, you have a late night discussion with friends, and any of these things that percolate to the service, call it out for each other. And ask people to call it out if you ever say them, the informal fallacy. But let's just look at a couple of them. They're basically what we would call equivocation. Equivocation is when you have this concept, and they're opposites, and you try and hold them together. That's a contradiction. Contradiction is a violation of logic. So in these things, you've got the dicto simpliciter. That's the fallacy of the sweeping generalization. I don't speak French, you don't speak French, nobody in this university speaks French. It's a way sweeping generalization. It's inaccurate. You'll hear it though. Hasty generalization, similar to the sweeping generalization, it abstracts beyond merit. So you look at the particulars and pull out an abstraction. So here's an example. Can I say Prague is the most beautiful city in the world? With credit, why not? You shook your head no real quick. Yes, go ahead.
Because that's a very subjective claim.
Beg your pardon?
That's a subjective claim.
It's a subjective statement about an objective reality. About an object. I don't know if I've got the reality accurate, right? Why can't I say Prague is the most beautiful city in the world and have credit? I haven't been to all the cities in the world, right? Can I say Prague is the most beautiful city I've seen? That has more merit. But then if you ask me, well, what cities have you seen, Jerry? And I say, well, I've been to Barstow, California. It doesn't have a whole lot of credit, right? Barstow's... Is anybody from Barstow? If you are, we'll pray for you. It's not a very beautiful place. But if I said to you, oh, I've been to Salzburg, Austria. I've been to Vienna. I've been to Budapest. I've been to Quebec City. Oh, man. Seattle. You were saying Seattle. That's a beautiful place. San Francisco. It's crumbling, San Francisco is, but it's still beautiful. The politicians can't destroy the beauty of that place. I've been to Cape Town, South Africa. I've been to I can go on and on and on and on. Now if I say Prague's the most beautiful city I've ever seen, it has a little more credit. But what can you ask me? Because all statements of judgment have to have a standard. You can have a guy in California drawing plans for a building that's being built in New York, and if they say cut the board at 7 feet, you're assuming that that guy, when you make the judgment, cut the board at 7 feet, is working from a same objective standard. What's the objective standard when I say Prague is the most beautiful city I've seen? What can you ask me?
Why?
Huh? Why? Why? Well, why it's the most beautiful city I've seen? Well, I have seen it. That helps. No, you could ask, you're onto something though. You could say, what's your standard of beauty and how do you measure a city by virtue of it? And if I went and said, well, Thomas Aquinas said, a beautiful object is something that has integrity, proportion, and clarity. And if I begin to talk about those three defined terms of, he looked at thousands of things and abstracted from the particulars these qualities. Now if I look at those qualities and I apply it to Prague and I can explain that, that has more merit. I can't say it's the most beautiful city in the world, I haven't seen them all, but I can say it's a beautiful city and for these reasons. That has merit. If I can't do that, then the best I can do is, I really like Prague. I'm affected by its beauty. I can say that, but I'm not overstating and making these hasty generalizations, okay? An abusive ad hominem, call the person a name rather than deal with the content of what they said. Straw man argument. You portray the person you want to take apart and you portray their argument falsely, and then you dismantle your falsehood rather than actually deal with the reality of what they've said. How do we avoid this? I don't think we can get neutrality, people, and I don't think that that's necessarily bad. Our opinions have been shaped by our life experience. That's okay. But if we want to grow, we have to be open to the fact that those opinions could be challenged. And so consequently, though we can't get neutrality, we can get impartiality. My doctoral supervisor, Basil Mitchell, he was at Oxford University, and Mitchell was an eminent philosopher of religion. And he said, you can get impartiality, but how do you get impartiality? You give the other person veto power over your point of view of their position. So if Claudia, my wife, says this to me, and I hear this, then we talk like this. We miss each other completely. 3 days later, I say, hey, Claudia, do you remember when you said this to me? She said, I never said that to you. I said, Claudia, I was in the room. Now it's a matter of integrity. No, I heard her through my grid. I didn't hear her. So the way you get impartiality is you give the other person veto power over your position. She says this. I say, Claudia, is this what you meant? Heavens no, how'd you get that? I say, well, I don't always get it right in this relationship. She says, yeah, we've proved that frequently. I say, be patient with me, give it to me again. She gives it to me again. I say, is this it? She says, that's better, but that's still not quite it. One more time, be patient. She says it, and I say, is this it? She says, that's exactly what I was thinking. Now we're on the same page, and a lot of times that eliminates the conflict. But if it doesn't, then I could say, that makes a lot of sense to me given A, B, and C, but were you aware of X, Y, and Z? She may say, no, I wasn't. That's useful information then. Or she might say, actually, I was aware of X, Y, and Z. Were you aware of L, M, N, O, and P? And I end up growing because I hear what she says. So there's the idea of the straw man argument to avoid it. And then hypothesis contrary to fact. It's classified under this heading, might be something like this. Had the Wright brothers not invented a heavier than air flying machine, the airplane would never have been invented. That's a hypothesis contrary to fact. Maybe somebody else would have invented it. The guy Capriani was the guy who invented a plane in Italy, and he didn't know the Wright brothers had invented a plane in America. And he was flying, and it was just a few years after the Wright brothers invented it. Some Christians say Had we never known bad, we couldn't have known good. Have you ever heard people say that? That's not only false, it's also heresy when it comes to Christianity. God is primary. We're not dualists. We don't believe in an equal and opposite good and bad. The bad banana presupposes a good banana that went bad. Evil for the Christian is a perversion of the good. Evil compares the good like bread mold compares to bread. But what can God do? What can man do with bread mold? We make penicillin out of it. Can we not at least allow God the capacity out of his goodness to even bring good out of the bad in this world? But you don't have to know bad to know good. That's false. That's a hypothesis contrary to fact. False analogy is when you compare apples and oranges. You compare one thing with something that isn't really comparable. And this is so invasive in our culture. And it's so false. How many of you have heard it before? A mother has a right to her own body. Nobody disagrees with that. I believe that. Question is the baby in the womb her body? It doesn't have the same DNA. It doesn't have the same blood type. It may not even be the same gender. But we've taken a false analogy and stuffed it down people's throats so they think if you believe in pro-life, that you're being assaulting to women. It's utterly false, and it's sustained by a false analogy in logic, an informal fallacy. Begging the question. That's when you assume the outcome, but you haven't proved the point. And that's false. Poisoning the wells. Say something terrible about the person. Oh yeah, my opponent in this election, before he speaks, I want you to know that he beats up old ladies in nursing homes and has not paid his taxes in years. He stole the Girl Scout cookie drive revenues and lets his dog poop in his neighbor's yard and never cleans it up. Okay, Joe, come speak. I poisoned the wells. I've assaulted his credit before he speaks. It's false. Amphibology is when you create ambiguity by using a word more than one way. It's equivocation. Do you have a cat? Yeah. Has your cat had kittens? Yeah. Your cat is a mother? Oh, yeah. It's your cat? Yeah. Well, then it must be your mother. You see where the falsehood slipped in? You have these sorts of things, not as blatantly strong as that one or obvious as that one, but there they are. And then suppressed evidence, where we withhold data that would count against our view. There's a guy named Bart Ehrman. He teaches at University of North Carolina. He wrote a book on the problem of evil called God's Problem. Everybody who studies problem of evil, I've read probably, 500 books on this topic. And everybody who studies it, there's a body of knowledge that you should know. And Ehrman's a smart guy. He's not a dumb guy. He went to Moody Bible Institute. He went to Wheaton College, and he rejected his faith. And he wrote this book that's an assault on Christian theology, taking on the problem of evil, but he holds out information that anybody who really reads about theodicy should know. Why does he withhold it? I had a student come to Wheaton College in grad school, and she went to the University of North Carolina. I said, oh, did you ever have a Bart Ehrman class? And she started crying right in front of me. I said, why are you crying? She said, first day of class, he said, are there any evangelicals in this class? She raised her hand. She thought she was in a friendly environment. He says, you're the one I'm going after every day. Could you imagine? Now, is that typical of him? I don't know. I met Ronald Reagan 35 times. Every time I met him, you were the only person in the room. I met Joe Biden once. Hi. Now, I can't judge him. Why? Because it's one example. He may have been very present. I've heard Clinton was very present when you meet him, so on. But was that one experience that I had? All elephants walk in a single file line. At least the one I saw did. You see how it's not enough information. Hypothesis contrary to fact. Okay, but just the same. You don't say that to a student. What Ehrman said to this one woman. Maybe it was a bad day for him. Maybe his biorhythms were off. We'll give him doubt, hermeneutical suspicion. And then poisoning wells, amphibology, suppressed evidence, you hold back data. Fallacy of the complex question, have you stopped beating your wife? How do you answer that question? If you say yes, that's bad. If you say no, that's, well, what were you, how come you haven't stopped? You paint the person into a corner. And you see it all the time on the news where the reporter asks a person a question like that. It's just bad. Red herring, you ask a person a question and they answer something over here. It's called a red herring because it swims away to another issue rather than the one that you want to talk about, and this person gets off track. The either-or proposition, sometimes there are either-ors, but it's basically a false dilemma. You always, you never. There are times when people always do something or they never do something, but it's infrequent. And I remember catching myself early on in my marriage, probably about year 6, I realized I was doing this with my wife. I would sometimes say to her, Claudia, you always do this, or Claudia, you never do that. And I said, Lord, that was wrong. I'd go back and ask my wife forgiveness. Say, I was wrong when I did that. And I'd catch myself again. I say, Lord, you got to help me. You got to help me. Catch me in the act. So one time she did something and I said, Claudia, you always do this. And I stopped and I said, no, that's not true. And she looked at me and I said, sometimes you do this. And I go, no, that's not true either. Once in a while, no, that's not true. Claudia, you hardly ever do this at all. What's the matter with me that I can't see straight here? And that's important for us to get to that place. You know, the pursuit of truth has to have an element of humility in it, and I'll talk about that again. Sentimental appeal. And that's when we hear a sad story, and so we compromise the truth with a sad story. Well, I know the Bible says stuff that would be contrary to abortion, but I have a friend. I know same-sex marriage is wrong, but I have a friend, or my son or my daughter, you know, and we want to be happy for them. You say, you're compromising truth for which you're calling love, but it's probably more like condoning. Now, you want to love your child. I get that. You should want to love your child. But I think you could love them without condoning. You can hold the truth and love at the same time. I said, you need to do that sort of thing the way Jesus did it. And they go, where did Jesus ever deal with something like this? Remember in John 8, the woman caught in adultery? And she's thrown before him? Where's the man, first off? I'm always asking that question. And then they say, Moses commanded us to stone such a one. What do you say? Well, the law says that. There's a truth there. And Jesus bends over and he's writing on the sand. I don't know what he's writing. I think probably he was embarrassed for the poor woman, and probably she was scantily clothed if she was caught in the act. And they say, Moses commanded us to stone, and they persist. And he said, let him who's without sin cast the first stone. Jesus does an appendage to that. Moses also said that. So they were selective in what they were taking to accuse this woman. And all of a sudden, these guys start peeling off, and Jesus is left alone with the woman. And he tells us what to say when we know somebody who's caught up in some kind of sin, and we want to love them, but we want to hold to the truth. He says, did no one condemn you? She said, no one, Lord. Neither do I condemn you. There's the love. Now go your way and sin no more. There's the unwillingness to relax the standard. And if the person's unwilling to comply, we can still love them, but we don't affirm. We don't hang rainbow flags outside of our church. We say everybody's welcome, and everybody should be welcome to any church, anytime. But you don't say, we support this lifestyle. That's not biblical, okay? So you get the idea anywhere these informal, non sequitur. That's when things don't follow along logically. There's more we could say about this, but that's probably enough. I want to conclude with these ideas. Truth is dynamic. And if that's true, then my understanding of truth is change is necessary. What kind of change is necessary? You can have a change of kind. You cut down the tree and make a table out of it. Or you have a change of degree. The tree changes when it adds rings and it develops girth. So your understanding of truth is always in a process of change. Is it a change of kind that's necessary? You got it wrong. Or is it a change of degree? You get to add more and have a more robust understanding. And consequently, we can have a sure word about truth. You can have a sure word. That means you can speak a truth with confidence. You don't get a last word about anything. That means then you have to hold the sure word that you know in an open hand and open to the process of change, whatever change will be necessary. Hold it with an open hand. That means you can have a sure word with confidence, but you have also the recognition you don't get a last word, which means you have to hold what you believe with humility. With humility. There's more. There's more. And every truth that we know can be plumbed more deeply. It can be applied more widely. And it can be seen in coherent relations with other truths. This is a pen. That's true. But it also has a width. It has a length. It has a molecular structure. It has an ink that has a particular chemical compound. It has a molecular structure. We could talk on and on and on about this. It's a pen. That's the sure word. The fact that I don't have the last word keeps me interested in this. This is no threat to understanding and knowledge, but it is the gateway to wonder and awe and worship. Any questions? Say it again.
For that last one, you were saying you can have a change of kind, and then you have a change of, what was that?
A change of kind versus a change of degree. I'll give you an example.
A change of kind versus the word, sorry.
Degree.
Okay, degree. Thank you.
Degree. So I'll give you an example. It was believed before the great supernova in Cassiopeia that everything, late 1500s, that everything between Earth and the moon was mutable and in a change. It's changing. Everything beyond the moon was not changing. It was immutable, constant. Then there was a supernova in Cassiopeia. A star expanded, became, and then collapsed on itself. So there was Descartes, who said, wow, this is different than what we believed. I'm going to doubt everything. And he doubts everything, and he's trying to say, where do I begin with my understanding of how to think? And he says, well, I'm doubting. That's a rational activity. And he said, I think, therefore I know. So he began with reason, his approach to philosophical and epistemological verification with reason, but it was self-referential. What he should have done was just doubted the idea about things changing that are in the heavens, but he didn't. He projected it on everything. The rationalists, the Cartesian philosophers, and those that followed along that line in Europe, they were confronted by the empiricists in England, John Locke. And no. We learn from experience. The mind is a blank slate. Experience writes on the blank slate. C.S. Lewis said that if the mind was a blank slate before the experience, it would still be a blank slate after the experience. Just like a movie screen is still a blank screen after the movie's been projected on it. For you to make sense of the experience, you have to come with memory. You have to come with the capacity to sort, big, bigger, biggest, and so on. So the empiricists started down the Lockean line, and they made lots of mistakes. And before Descartes and Locke, who were both Christians, by the way, before them, it was always believed that truth was validated by a check and balance of authority, reason, and experience. I've had people tell me things that I thought were authority, but they gave me bad advice. I've seen people pull rabbits out of hats. I kind of think that they didn't really do that, but it was a trick. But I saw it. And as far as reason, I was sincere about geometry. I didn't do so well with that, So you need the check and balance to balance those things. Okay, so around that same time, though, you had a guy named Galileo, who all of a sudden takes a telescope and turns it towards the heavens. And it was believed in his day that everything went around the earth. It was geocentric. And he looks up at Jupiter and he can see the 4 moons of Jupiter. But he sees one day 1. Another day he sees 4. Another day he sees 3. Another day he sees 2. And he realizes they're going around Jupiter, not around the Earth. And then he looks at Venus. Sometimes in the sky, Venus is really bright, and sometimes in the sky, it's less bright, in the shape of a disk. When it's more bright, it's in the shape of a crescent. And he realized, no, Venus is in the shape of a disk when it's on the other side of the sun from us. And it's in the shape of a crescent when it's between the sun and us. And he started realizing Venus went around the sun. He saw the same thing with Mercury, but Mercury went faster. He could count the days, and it didn't take that long. Venus went in less time for a year than our time for a year. Then he looked at Mars, and it wasn't such great periods of time, but still it took longer, maybe 5 years of our time. And Mars was always in the shape of a disk, so he realized it was in an exterior orbit to the Earth. And so he said that the Ptolemaic and Aristotelian understanding of a geocentric solar system was wrong. It's heliocentric. It all goes around the sun. That was a change of kind. But as C.S. Lewis writes about it in The Discarded Image, Galileo was wrong, because he thought his theory of theories was a last word and there was nothing more to be said. But in his own day, Kepler came on the scene and said, the planets don't go around the sun in a circle. They go around the sun in an ellipsis. That's why we have a 365-day year rather than a 360-day year. So he asserted something that was unchanging for him, and while he got the geocentricity wrong, he showed that it was wrong, and we were heliocentric as our solar system. What he got wrong was his theory of theories, that he had said a last word, there was nothing more to be said. And then Kepler comes on the scene and says, this theory it needs to be modification. Kepler's modification is a modification of degree, not of kind. Still goes around the sun, but it's an ellipsis, not a circle. Does that make sense then? Those two? Yeah.
Now when you brought up...
Say it again?
Now when you brought up six-day creationists, are you referring to theists?
Am I what?
Are you referring to theists?
Theists?
When you say six-day creationists.
No, I believe God created in 6 days, and that this is a young earth, not an old earth.
Young Earth.
Yeah, I don't know how old it is. I believe God created with full functionality. If we went right where the Great Barrier Reef is today, if we went back right after creation, I think you wouldn't have found a sandy bottom ocean. I think you would have found an entire ecosystem in place to support all the fish that live there. I think there could have been a homing pigeon whose first conscious moment is he's flying to the home he knows but he's never been to before. And my biggest coup de grace on it is when Jesus turns the water into wine, and he brings the wine to the head waiter, and he says it's good wine. That wine was made with a history. It didn't have an actual history, but I make wine. It takes time. And so minimum months. And here's the head waiter tasting it. It says it's good wine. To be good wine, it has to have aged. And yet Jesus made it instantly. And I think creation was like that. He created with full functionality. He didn't just create flowers and then wait for bees to somehow come along so that they could pollinate the flowers. He created bees that could pollinate at the same time he created the flowers. It's interesting, huh? Now, I have great friends who have different views, and they think I'm wrong. There's even one guy who wrote a commentary on the book of Genesis, and we had a discussion about this, and he sent me his commentary, and he says, you're the friend on page 64. And he says, I have a friend who believes this. And he said, it has merit, but he's wrong.
So when you say 6 days, do you mean like literally 6 days?
Yeah.
Like 24 hours? Like
Yeah.
ABC days?
Yeah.
Or, because how can we know that?
Huh?
Like, how can we know that they were literally 6 days and not like, because God's timing could be different than how we think of days.
It could be, but he uses the word, whenever he uses the word yom in Hebrew and has a number attached to it, and all the other references in the Bible, it's a literal 24-hour day. So here's now 6 days. There's a view, it's a Christian view, there are good Christians who believe it, that they're revelatory days, that God gave Moses on each day a revelation of what occurred when he created. And he gave him long periods of time in that revelation. There's also the view, for God, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. There's that view too. That's the age day theory. There's a lot of theories out there, and there are good Christians who hold them. But what you've got to do is you've got to reconcile two things, two different views of revelation. Natural revelation, here's the universe and its functioning. It seems to indicate certain things, and some people say seems to indicate great, great, great age. Then you've got the creation account that seems to indicate something more recent. So how do I reconcile the two revelations? And most of the discussion is about how we reconcile it. And most of the views that are put forth try to show how we reconcile it. I reconcile it by saying, I think God created a universe with full functionality. If you cut down trees, they'd already have rings. If you looked at the world, it already had a history, just like the wine that Jesus made had a history.
So it'd be like when they say what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Say it again.
It was already there. So
Say it again.
it's like when they say like what came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, the chicken was already there, so
That would be, but he could have made a chicken laying an egg at the very moment, right? I don't know how it happened, but I believe it was created with full functionality. And I don't get upset at somebody who has a different view, because I look at a scientist who looks at the world and tells me about the quality of the world, even if I don't believe their history. Just like I could believe that the head waiter, when he said this was good wine, if he had been a sommelier, he could have said, oh, this is clearly a Pinot Noir, and it must have come from Oregon, from the Willamette Valley in Oregon. And do you know about sommeliers? The highest level sommelier, they can tell you what vineyard the thing came from. There's only about 250 of them in the world. It takes them years to develop the sensitivity, but they make millions after that because people want to start a wine cave and they go to the sommelier. So anyway, if the head waiter was a sommelier, he would have told us all these qualities of the wine, and I would have accepted it even if I didn't believe that it was old. Yeah.
I'm so confused a little bit on how Jesus can be the way, the truth, and the life if truth is dynamic.
If truth is what?
Dynamic.
Oh, is your understanding of Jesus dynamic?
Yeah.
And he's true. He's a true statement. He could have said, I'm reality. Nothing holds together without me. It says it in Colossians. He could have said that. I don't think that's what he's saying there.
What do you think he's saying?
I think he's saying, I am God's ultimate statement about who he is and how you can know him. And that goes consistent with the argument of the book of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then it says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And then 18 times in that book he says, everything the Father has told me to do, I have done. And everything the Father has told me to say, I have said. And you're studying Philippians. And you go to Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 11. And it says, have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, who although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself and became a servant. And, he humbled himself even to the point of death in order that God might highly exalt him. He was, and have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus. We're supposed to live the same way. When you read God's word, you're supposed to do what it tells you to do, and you're supposed to say what it tells you to say. And we're supposed to live like Christ lived. Have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus. You want a good picture of it? Go back to John's Gospel 18 times. What the Father told me to do, what the Father told me to say. Then you go to the Upper Room Discourse. It's 1/4 of that book is one night in Jesus' life. And what does he tell his disciples? I washed your feet. I gave you an example that you'll do as I did to you. Not only did I wash your feet, but all that the Father told me to do that I've said, all the Father told me to say, told me to do that I've done, all the Father told me to say that I've said, and I want you to go out like I went out. He says at the end of that book, as the Father sent me, so send I you. I'm going to go to the Father, and I'm going to go prepare a place for you. If I prepare a place for you, I'm going to come back and get you. But here's the thing. I'm not going to leave you alone. I'm not going to leave you as orphans. I'm going to send you another helper, allos parakletos, another exactly like me. And he's going to bring to your mind all I have said and all I have done, that you'll do what I said and you'll live a true life before God and before the watching world. And I think there's an order to it, and I think there's a symmetry. I could be wrong. There are people who have different views. That's okay. I don't mind the discussion. But as I seek to understand it, I think it's moving in that direction, and it's coherent. That what it says in John's gospel is coherent with what you're memorizing in Philippians. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think he's saying, he could have said I'm reality, or I'm at the core of reality, or I'm the one who undergirds reality, but he didn't say that. He says I am the way, the truth, and the life. The way to God. The truth about God. And if you want to know what life really looks like, look at the way I've lived it and try and live it like that. Does that make sense? Yeah. We're done? Yep. Blessings on you guys.
You guys excited to have Jerry this week? Yeah. I am excited for the grill tomorrow. So Q&A tomorrow with Jerry, and like I said, he's going to be leading our book discussion tomorrow on Mere Christianity. He alluded a little bit to C.S. Lewis tonight. Can you give us some of your background on C.S. Lewis?
Yeah.
And what you studied and what you teach?
Yeah. I got introduced to him. I became a Christian my first year of college. And I made it my goal to share Jesus with every guy I played football with and every guy I wrestled with in college every year. And I saw about 15 guys a year come to Christ. So I saw about 60 come to faith during that time. And they weren't all there at the same time. I even taught a Bible study to them. And I was a brand new Christian. I'm sure I taught heresy. I just was trying to do the best I knew how. But my friends, when I'd witness them, would ask me questions, and I didn't know the answers to the questions. If God's good and all-powerful, why is there evil in the universe? I never once asked that question before I was a Christian. I'm ashamed to say it. I've since written a book about it. It matters to me. But they would ask me about, what about other religions? They would ask me about, how do we know the Bible's really God's word? How do you know Jesus is really who he claimed to be? And so on. And I would go look for answers, and I would see Lewis in the literature. And I'd read the quotes, and I was impressed by the quotes, but I never bothered to read them. Then I had a philosophy professor in college. I was at a secular school. There were only 3 Christian profs at that college that I knew of. This philosophy professor was one of the most respected profs, and he was requiring Lewis books. So I took his class, and I ended up majoring in that professor. I took every class I could from him. And then at the end, in the spring break of my junior year, I went and visited my sister, and she was teaching 5th grade kids, and she was reading the Narnian books. And she told me one night over dinner the plot of that Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I go, there's books like that? Come on. I bought a set of the Narnian books. I read them. I was fascinated. But I wanted to find out more about him, so I bought Surprised by Joy. It's a story of how he moved from atheism to Christianity, and we'll talk about that on that talk tomorrow. And I was intrigued by that. He talked about the fact that he was haunted by these deep longings, and he's looking for the object of his longings. I knew the longings. He gave me a vocabulary for my own soul. So I started reading him voraciously. And a guy said to me when I graduated from college, you don't get an education in college. I go, well, why am I paying tuition for this then? He says, you don't get an education in college, you lay a foundation for an education. And they call the graduation exercises commencement. And he said, after commencement, you start commencing your education by building on that foundation. Pick an author who will take you places and make that author your life study. I think he could have said, pick an artist, pick a composer, pick a period of history, pick a country, but something that will keep you stretching. Lewis wrote all these books, 73 books. He wrote one book called English Literature in the 16th Century, Excluding Drama. 700-page book. I've read it many times. To write that book, he read every book that was written in the 16th century. Every book that was written in English in the 16th century. He read every book translated into English if it was Old Italian, French, Latin, whatever. He read it in the original and in translation, so his judgments would be fair-minded. They wouldn't be overstated. That's just one book. During the time he wrote that book, 18 years it took him to write it. He wrote it for the Oxford History of English Literature. He called it his Oh Hell volume, Oxford History, English Literature. 18 years to write that book, but while he wrote that book, he wrote the science fiction books. He wrote most of the Narnian books. He wrote Screwtape Letters. He wrote Mere Christianity. He wrote Miracles. He wrote a bunch of other literary critical works and so on. This guy was prolific, and I'm reading these things, and it's taking my breath away, and he'll say something about a book, and I'll say, I got to read that book. In The Discarded Image, he said, the most influential book on medieval literature, bar none, no comparison, the Bible. Second most influential book on medieval literature, Boethius, The Consolation of Philosophy. And a person wasn't considered educated up to 150 years ago if they didn't know that book. I'd never heard of it before. I go to the bookstore, I say, do you have Boethius? They go, yeah, it's right here. Who's writing today that 1,500 years from now his books are still going to be on the shelf? I read the book. I count it one of the 10 best books I ever read. How many of you ever struggled with foreknowledge and free will? If God foreknows what we're going to do before we get there, do we really have free will, or isn't it all determined? Boethius answers that question so simply, you say, why did I ever have a struggle with that? It's brilliant stuff. And Lewis gives a 16-page summary of Boethius in The Discarded Image, because again, it was the most influential book on medieval literature. So I go read the books that Lewis refers to, and I find Chaucer's Troilus and Cressida. Pander, one of the characters, recounts the entire argument of Boethius. Paradise Lost by John Milton. He is talking about Boethius. Dante's talking about Boethius. They're all talking about Boethius. I never noticed it before, but I'm reading those books because I'm picking up in Lewis the desire to want to read those books because I'm reading Lewis. He's been my liberal arts education. He opens more than wardrobe doors, people, and you can read him, and there you go. And so it's been a great white knuckle ride. I've actually been teaching on him. I've been studying him for 54 years, teaching on him for 44 years. I've lectured on him in 81 universities in 21 different countries. It's amazing. And I'm just surprised they even asked me to come because I feel like I'm a doofus and I don't know very much. But that's okay. Who is it going to be that's going to be the thing that you're interested in that 40 years from now your life will be more informed? It will bring you such great joy. You'll dig down so deep and you'll go wider in your understanding because of this pilgrimage. Pick somebody now, you're young. That's what I did. That's what happened. So anyway.